Hello and welcome to the first Booker Prize podcast of 2024 with me, Jo Hamier.
And today, not only with me, James Walton, but also with our special guest, Alex Clark, critic, book reviewer for pretty much every publication you can think of, former editor of Granta magazine, and host of the TLS podcast, as in Times Literary Supplement, which a lot of people think is the second best books podcast around.
You're so rude,
God bless you. God bless you. God bless you, Alex. Only joking.
I'll take it. I'm going to take that. I'm happy with that.
Oh, good. And Alex is joining us today for a sneak preview of some of the big new novels coming out this year, particularly those by authors with some Booker form in the past. So welcome, Alex. Lovely to have you with us. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from the hills of South East Ireland of County Kilkenny.
Oh, how very lovely.
We'll get on to our upcoming list of books for 2024 soon. But first, Alex, I believe you were a Booker judge in 2008 when chair of the judges was Michael Portillo. What was that like?
Well, I was so excited to be asked. I mean, it seemed like just the most extraordinary honour to be asked. And I can still remember being taken for a drink by Ian Trewin and him popping the question. And I couldn't really believe it was true. So I was very, very excited. And then, of course, the piles and piles of books arrive. And I don't know if this is still the system, but I know certainly on my library shelves, I still have books with sort of marker pen numbers on. I don't know if that's still how it's done. It's quite old school, but we had 1 to 128 or whatever it was, magic markered onto the spines of our books, and I still find them now and then. I've kept every single book.
Okay, well, thanks, Alex. And let me tell you the plan for today, and indeed our listeners, which is that we're going to take turns introducing a 2024 book by an author that we like, saying a bit about that author's past record and generally setting the scene for what should be some of the biggest new fiction of the year. And Alex, seeing as you're the guest and we're a very well brought up podcast, why don't you go first?
Well, my first novel is Colm Tóibín's Long Island, which is out in May and which is a sequel to Brooklyn, which was shortlisted for the prize in 2009. This poor man, he's becoming the Beryl Bainbridge. He's had 4 shortlistings.
Yeah.
So, we never try to influence judges in any way. But I am saying, if you're going to shortlist this again, you need to be quite sure. Don't put him through a 5th winner ceremony. But this is us meeting Eilish Fiorello, Eilish Lacey, as was 20 years after the events of Brooklyn, when she is married and she is living in Long Island. And we see what has happened to her and whether, of course, she made the right decision in staying in New York or not going home to Enniscorthy.
Enniscorthy, which is not far from where you live, apparently.
It's very near where I live. It's in Wexford, but I live near a lot of county borders. And I have to say, if you drive into Enniscorthy, which you might do, because you might go and visit the castle, for example, you will be greeted by a big sign with Colm Tóibín's lovely face on it, saying, "Welcome to Enniscorthy, home of Colm Tóibín."
It's amazing, isn't it? I don't think there would be a British equivalent. It does seem as if literature's woven into Irish life more than into British life. Have you discovered that since you moved there?
I do feel like that. And I have to be completely truthful. I moved here nearly 6 years ago and got a lot of family here. And I am very aware of my rose-tinted spectacles. It's obviously not a perfect society. However, I enjoy being a person who works with books and language more in Ireland than I did in the UK, if that makes sense. I mean, in the way that the entire culture responds to books and to writers. I think there's less obsession with hierarchy and genre. There's just a much more inclusive feel to things like live events, to prizes. So it could be rose-tinted spectacles, but yeah, that is what I find.
Okay, well, thanks, Alex. And I see your much-loved Irish writer returning to one of his best-loved female characters. And I raise you, Roddy Doyle, whose book, The Women Behind the Door, is out in September and is the 3rd of his books about Paula Spencer. So she first appeared in The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, and then a book just called Paula Spencer, and now we rejoin her. So had a pretty grim life because, she was the wife of an alcoholic drunk who beat the living daylights out of her for 17 years. Just to put that into sort of context, Roddy Doyle, started off as a rather jolly writer with The Commitments in 1987, hit the jackpot straight away. About a Dubliners who form a soul band, becomes a film directed by Alan Parker, a West End musical, a best-selling soundtrack album. Follows that with books about the same rabbit family, the Snapper and the Van shortlisted for the Booker Prize, then wins the Booker Prize with Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, in 1993, narrated by a 10-year-old boy whose parents, we realise more than he does, are splitting up, leading to the tragic playground chant, Paddy Clark has no da, Paddy Clark, ha ha ha. Anyway, so that book topped the Irish bestsellers list for more than a year. He became a bona fide national hero in Ireland, and later recalled photo opportunities with the horse that won the Melbourne Gold Cup, because we both brought glory to our country. But then, May the 8th, 1994, all that comes to an end when Irish television broadcast the first episode of his drama series Family. Once again, the setting was the housing estates of North Dublin, but this time the father wasn't twinkling and lovable as he had been more or less in the first 3 books, but Charlo Spencer, this wife-beating drunk who terrorised his family over 4 episodes of virtually unrelieved grimness. And then, as Doyle recalled this as 17 years later, it caused a storm. The celebrity status that attached to me when I won the Booker, invitations to open supermarkets and all that shite, it all stopped that day Family was broadcast. And meanwhile, his books, I think, have got sort of grimmer and grimmer. As a trilogy that sort of took apart the IRA, past and present. Smile, which ripped into the Catholic Church. So much a sort of angrier and blacker sort of writer than people think. But is he still popular in Ireland? Presumably.
Oh, very, very much so. And also because, of course, he, another strand of his writing is something that appears in newspapers and in books also, which is, his versions of conversations in pubs, basically.
Yeah, terrific,
blokes in pubs talking. And they are not actually, to your point, really, as sentimental as just that little one line might make them sound. But they are, they care about the island that he is familiar with. They understand why it has an important place in people's emotions. But I think you're right. He does not turn away from the dark side of Irish society.
I'm going to move us away from Ireland now.
Oh.
I'm going to go chronologically. So the next book that I'm excited for comes out in March in the US by Doubleday, and in April from Picador, it's Percival Everett James, which is a retelling of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. And so whilst certain set pieces from that classic remain the same, the narrative emphasis, I expect, will be fundamentally changed. So for anyone who hasn't read Huckleberry Finn, it's a kind of two-hander. I mean, in Twain's version, Huck Finn is definitively the main character. But he essentially fakes his own death to escape his violent father, who's recently returned to town, and begins a very sort of dangerous journey by raft down the Mississippi River towards the Free States. And along the way, he acquires a companion in the form of an enslaved man called Jim. This sort of does make me think, this idea of Percival Everett retelling Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, of that line from Paul Beatty's The Sellout, in which one character who's the member of an intellectual group rewrites a version of Huck Finn where he replaces, quote, the repugnant N-word, unquote, with warrior, and replaces the word slave with dark-skinned volunteer. And the retitled book is called The Prerogative Free Adventures and Intellectual and Spiritual Journeys of African-American Jim and his young protege, white brother Huckleberry Finn, as they go in search of the lost black family unit. I think Everett has always been an uncompromisingly lacerating and fiercely intelligent writer. Booker fans will know him by his 2022 shortlisted book, The Trees, which quite brutally and maybe a bit improbably, although it seems entirely probable in the book, takes the story of Emmett Till's lynched body and makes it into a quasi-detective novel. But he's probably best known for Erasure, which is a novel in which an African-American professor called Thelonious Monk Ellison decides to leave intellectual things behind. And he decides to satirize Americans' love for fetishizing blackness into essentially what you might call hood culture by writing a novel called My Pathology, which is later simply retitled Fuck, under the pseudonym Stag R. Lee. And that becomes a surprise bestseller, which leads to sort of all sorts of philosophical conundrums on Monk's part. It's recently actually been made into a film with Issa Rae that's come out. It came out late in 2023,
Yeah.
and I think we'll get a wider release.
Yeah, it's
this year.
called American Fiction, which
Yes,
is a
it is
great
called
title
American
for it.
Fiction. I'm really excited for James because I think Everett has never really been short of awards, but he has been short of a kind of public attention that he's recently been getting. His debut novel called Suda was released in 1983, and I feel like I only really began to hear of Everett as a person maybe around the time that he got his Guggenheim Fellowship in 2015. But yeah, the last few years have been a rise to public prominence for him that's kind of way overdue, and particularly in the UK. He used to be published by a great indie that's I think now on hiatus called Influx Press, but his part of his backlist has just been bought by Picador, and James sold for $500,000, which for people who are not au fait with the process of acquisitions for literary fiction, most literary novels sell for between £1,000 and, if you're lucky, £10,000, unless you happen to have the last name Atwood or or Rushdie. So I feel like he's really kind of coming into a golden period that I'm quite happy to see. And I would say if for that reason you haven't yet read a Percival Everett novel, but you are a fan of Paul Beatty or Zadie Smith or No Violet Bulawayo, then you could definitely pick up James and give it a go. And also Erasure, which I just think is one of the most genius books I've ever read in my life.
It'll be really interesting, particularly as he's a fan of Mark Twain, so it doesn't sound as if it's going to be a takedown.
No, I don't think it. I can't.
No.
Like, the thing about him is he's always so surprising with his comedy. You never know exactly in which direction it's going to kind of hit out. So I make no predictions for the book except for the fact that it's probably going to be genius.
That's a firm prediction. Okay. Alex, do you want to add anything there? Or do you want to move on to your next one?
Well, I love The Trees. And the thing about it, obviously, such a horrific story that he was telling. It was so funny.
Yeah, that's the thing about him.
It was so incredibly pacey. I mean, you were just utterly sucked in. You were laughing. You didn't think you should be laughing. And of course, it was a retelling with all sorts of weird bits of genre fiction kind of melded into this retelling of an actual historical event. And a retelling of, this literary kind of icon, I suppose, is absolute classic, is fascinating. And you're right, you never really know what he's going to do you, Joe?
No.
It's so yeah, pretty excited by that too.
All right, Alex, what is your next pick?
Well, I'm going to go with Neel Mukherjee's Choice. He was shortlisted in 2014 for a really chunky, impressive novel called The Lives of Others, which was a family saga. It was about a family and all that entailed, all the sort of jockeying for position and who loves who most and who's a disappointment and who's not, the intermarriage of the younger generations of family with other families. But it also had the radical politics. It was set in the late 60s, early 70s in India. And this book, Choice, is three stories that are kind of interwoven with one another. And I suppose we've seen that in the book, haven't we? We've seen it this year with Jonathan Escoffery's novel, novel stories I loved. But Mukherjee is such an interesting and brilliant writer. He was a great favourite / protege of the late A.S. Byatt. And he just has a kind of fantastic engagement with different literary traditions. He works wonderfully at a kind of sentence level, and he's very interested in plotting. And this collection of 3 pieces, which all talk to one another, as I understand it, is about a publisher, an academic, and a family in rural India. So we wait to see what that happens. He was, of course, 4 books in now, so he's a very talented writer, so I'm excited by that.
And that's out in April, isn't it, I believe?
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, in that case, back to me. I seem to have cornered the marketing people who've actually won the Booker, because no, your books are all fine. Don't get me wrong. Which is Howard Jacobson with What Will Survive of Us, out in February. He's got pretty good Booker form, long listed for Who's Sorry Now and Kaluki Nights, shortlisted for Jay in 2014, and was a hugely popular winner in 2010 with The Finkler Question. And this seems to be about a female TV documentary maker and a male writer who fall in love in midlife after working together. And it sounds as if the book follows them through to old age, which suggests, I don't know how perceptive I'm being here, that this is may have its autobiographical elements, given that Jacobson's third wife, Jenny, he married in 2005, worked with him on TV documentaries before that, and they've been happily together ever since, with Jacobson now 81. It also suggests that he's going to give us one of his later, more sort of tender works, after a career mostly dedicated to the belief that a novel should be an impious disturbance that refuses ever to bow to the great God nice, as he said. So his early books, in fact, most of his books, up to about The Finkler Question, pretty ferocious. And I mean, I know I bang on about Philip Roth a lot, but he's actually known as the English Philip Roth as by the press, and as press labels go, that's not entirely inaccurate, I don't think, both in their biography, but also in their belief as to what books should do, which is basically to cause offence. He says, that a novel hasn't just got the right, it's got the duty to cause offence, because, quote, giving offence is sacred, his italics. He's also savaged universities for being scared of offending students, suggesting that everybody starting at once should be greeted with the words, "Good morning, students, welcome to a liberal education, where you will encounter, if we are doing our job right, much that will distress and infuriate you." But the thing is, since The Finkler Question, there's been no doubt that history is not rolling in the direction of writers like him. And in fact, since then, his books have become sort of nicer. And his last one, which was Live a Little, about love in old age, was positively sweet. I don't know if anybody read it. It's really, really lovely. And so the question is, what's happened to old Howard? And I think there's 3 possible reasons. One is that he suggested all of these at various points, is that he's sort of accepted, if not in massively good grace, that the new rules aren't going to go away or just be a fad as he'd hoped. So that's that. The swordsman hero, flashing his prose around, writing with a pen dipped in hot semen, was dead in the water, he writes. So that's one possibility. Another one is that maybe it's just time for a change. One of the minor characters in Live a Little is a novelist who sounds quite Jacobson-like, and it said of him, he's been going around in the same dreary emotional garb all his life. And as the older woman tells the old man in the book after they've fallen in love, you've told the same unvarying story to yourself 1,000 times. Risk another story. Or, third theory as to why Howard Jacobson's gone nice, it might just be autobiographical. He said in an interview a few years ago, "I've enjoyed the whole experience of aging, having been querulous, bitter, miserable, sometimes envious, mean, certainly a very bad husband. I've become at my age quite a nice guy." So anyway, I think this will be quite a sweet book about love from middle age to old age, of the kind that I'm looking forward to reading, but that would have been unimaginable from him sort of 20 years ago.
He's always been really interested in sentimentality.
Yes, there is that.
There are heroes, protagonists in his novels who themselves get absolutely kiboshed by their own sentimentality, by their own immoderation in loving, in jealousy, and all that kind of thing. I think he sort of has combined the two. I can't imagine a book by him that would be entirely sweet. His memoir, Mother's Boy, was amazingly brilliant at sort of combining these two aspects of, I suppose, his temperament, his sensibility, we might say. So I would read anything by Howard Jacobson. I mean, that piece that he wrote that became, I think, the title of a collection of his nonfiction, his journalism, about seeing a dog who was about to die. I mean, I can't read it now without weeping.
But I do think he's come to this new sweetness, as he says himself. I think maybe he has just become a nice guy. We shall see when that book is out in February.
The love of a good woman will do that to so many people.
That seems to be possible.
Okay, well, my next choice is someone who would robustly disagree with that statement. It's Rachel Kusk, whose Parade is coming out from Faber and Faber and from FSG in the US in June. Now, I think since the advent of the Outline trilogy, Kusk's novels are quite sort of enigmatic. When you try to sum them up. I'm a massive Rachel Kusk fan. She's one of the most influential writers in my life. But on this occasion, I am going to cheat and just read Faber's summary of it. And listeners can see what they make of it, because I don't think I could make anything cogent out of this. This definitely feels like a teaser. So, midway through his life, the artist G begins to paint upside down. Eventually, he paints his wife upside down. He also makes her ugly. The paintings are a great success. In Paris, a woman is attacked by a stranger in the street. Her attacker flees, but not before turning around to contemplate her victim, like an artist stepping back from a canvas. At the age of 22, the painter G leaves home for a new life in another country, far from the disapproval of her parents. Her paintings attract the disapproval of a man she later marries. When a mother dies, her children confront her legacy, the stories she told, the roles she assigned to them, the ways she withheld her love. Her death is a kind of freedom. And then you've got from Faber a kind of copy that says, Parade sets loose a carousel of lives and surges past the limits of identity, character and plot to tell the story of G, an artist whose life contains many lives. It does sound incredibly Kuskian, although a lot more complex than her last 4 novels, which I'm a massive fan of. So Kusk, as a bit of background, is, people who are sort of up to date on their Booker facts will know that she has been twice longlisted so far. First for Into the Fold in 2005, which is a novel about a man whose illusions of family life and country wealth and free living fall steadily apart. And then second place, which is the relationship between M, who is a writer, and L, who is a painter. M invites L to stay in her marshland home, and I don't think I can say much more about it without kind of spoiling everything for everyone. But I think Kusk is sort of best known for her Outline trilogy, none of which, incredibly enough, have been even longlisted for the Booker Prize.
She hasn't got a fantastic Booker record.
Which I think is like a tragedy. Anyway, if you can't tell, I really, really love Rachel Kusk, and Parade sounds like a kind of advance of a new stage of all the things that have made her last 4 books so special, amped up to a kind of another level. And I'm going to do my usual thing and do some comp writers. But if you are a sort of fan of Celia Paul's recent writing, a biography of her time at the Slade and as an older artist, or if you're a fan of Sheila Heti or of Annie Ernaux or of Deborah Levy, then I think Parade is kind of going to be right up your alley, and Rachel Kusk is someone that you should be checking out more generally.
She's a massive hate figure on Mum's Net, is one thing I know about her. Because she wrote a book called A Life's Work about being a mother, and how absolutely terrible
she did.
Was. She is completely unsparing. Where do you stand on Rachel Kusk, Alex?
Well, I agree. I love those books. I love the Outline trilogy. I also like quite a lot of her earlier books, which did the same thing in very different kind of narrative. She had very different narrative strategies, but exactly that kind of unflinchingness, that this very boring story about conversation about whether characters should be likable. I mean, doesn't even go. I mean, they're all horrible. Everyone's horrible and mad in all her books, and you can't say fairer than that, can you?
Yeah.
No. Alex, go on.
So my final pick is The Spoiled Heart by Sunjeev Sahota. Shortlisted in 2015 for the Year of the Runaways, and longlisted in 2021. Some would say I might be one of them that perhaps should have been shortlisted for China Room. And this is a book that's set in the Peak District, and it's about a man and a woman who have possibly known each other or been acquainted in some kind of way in a previous life. But it's basically about coming back. The female character, Helen, comes back, a child in tow, and then she meets this man, Nyan, who is a union leader. I was intrigued by this because union leaders, very big in Paul Lynch's Prophet Song. Maybe it's I need another one, and then I could write a trend piece about why unions are cropping up.
3 things make a trend, the old rule of journalism.
Exactly so, exactly. But I really, really like Sunjeev Sahota's work, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Okay, well, my next one is another Irish writer from the generation below Roddy Doyle and Colm Tóibín, I think. And this is Kevin Barry. He's different from them in another way too. Their prose, I mean, Tóibín's prose is so quiet, so subtle, so gentle. Roddy Doyle's is fairly straightforward. And this is Kevin Barry on his own prose. I knew from an early age, this is when he first started out, I knew that I would never have a quiet, unshowy prose style. Sometimes I yearned for one, but my prose behaved like an hysterical step-dancing ginger-haired child leaping up and down on the page looking for attention. And that's sort of been the case in his 3 books so far. There's one called City of Bohane, which was brilliant. It was his first book set in an island in the 2050s, a sort of cyberpunky Wild West, a really hard book to summarise, so I won't try, except to say it was extraordinarily good and funny and thrilling, and actually won the International Dublin Impact Award, which is worth 100,000 euros, which is, I'm sad to say, twice as much as the Booker. The second one was about John Lennon visiting an island off the Sligo coast that the real Lennon had bought in 1967, but long abandoned. It's a portrait of Lennon adrift, but still, again, a book with sentences absolutely lapping up and down, looking for attention. But in that case, I felt slightly as a substitute for forward momentum rather than aid to it. His third book, Out to Tangier, which was longlisted for the 2019 Booker, was the same, really. It was in that case, it wasn't really until about halfway through that it ran out of steam, I felt. But it's about 2 aging Irish gangsters who, like John Lennon, actually, their glory days are behind them by the time we join them. But it's still a great book. And I still think he's an amazing writer, and he'll write plenty of really, really great books in the future. And obviously, I'm hoping that one of them will be his new one, which is The Heart in Winter, out in June. And it sounds as if it's playing to his strengths. It's set in Butte, Montana in 1891. Hard winter approaches across the Rocky Mountains. I'm quoting from the below a bit here. City is rich in copper miners and rampant with vice and debauchery among a hard-living crowd of Irish immigrant workers. Here we find Tom Rourke, a young poet and ballad maker of the town, but also a doper, a drinker, and a fearsome degenerate. I think I'll leave it there. But that sounds like what's not to like to me. And I do think Kevin Barry. I don't know if he's quite broken through to the British. Is he a big deal in Ireland again? My traditional question.
He is. Yes.
Yes, he's great, isn't he?
In that generation. Yeah, absolutely.
So I look forward to that very much. The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry, out in June. Jo, I think you got non-fiction for us now, eh?
Yes, I've got a kind of whistle-stop tour through all the non-fiction that I'm interested in that's coming out, and it is really eclectic and kind of fascinating. So I'm really invested in this month's collected essays from John Berger's archive called The Underground Sea, which is a kind of compilation of his writings on the miners' strike. I was really, really lucky, and I'm going to do a massive shout out to a piece of work that I and our producer for this podcast, John, did a while ago, to work on a John Berger documentary for Booker. And I spent quite a lot of time in the British Library in his archives, which are just so rich and beautifully written and illustrated as well. And I just think that is an incredible thing to look out for, especially in the throes of our current Conservative government and an upcoming general election. The next thing that's really intriguing, and I did say that this would be eclectic, is that Kazuo Ishiguro has an upcoming kind of book of song lyrics written for the jazz singer Stacey Kent, he's been collaborating with since 2007.
He's a classic frustrated musician among many Booker writers, isn't he?
Yes, it's called The Summer We Crossed Europe in the Rain,
yep.
Which is very Cohen, isn't it?
Yes. Possibly not that frustrated anymore.
And that's going to be out in March. And then finally, the one that probably everyone is going to be most intrigued by is Knife by Salman Rushdie. Now, for those of you not aware, Rushdie was stabbed several times whilst giving a talk in upstate New York, and the stabbing did occur in connection with the fatwa that he's had placed upon him since the publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. And it's pretty much, with the exception of an interview given to the New York Times in 2023, going to be the first thing we hear about his recollections and musings on the incident. So that is kind of anticipated, sounds like a really glib word to use for something that's resulted in him losing sight in one eye.
But it is anticipated. There's a big deal.
Yeah.
The subtitle is "Meditations After an Attempted Murder."
Yeah.
So that will make us splash. As I suspected would happen, we're running out of time a bit now with several books to go. So, and one of these, the most eagerly awaited or possibly feared, must be My Heavenly Favourite by Lucas Rijneveld, translated by Michele, Hutchison, who together won the International Booker in 2020 with The Discomfort of Evening, a novel that in the traditional formulation was not for the faint-hearted. Publishers Weekly said the macabre material is loaded with sexual transgressions, paedophilia, animal torture and abuse. The onslaught can be numbing. But apparently it could have been worse because, according to The Guardian, the Dutch version also contained a joke deemed too offensive for British publication, which I'd love to know what that was. And it sounds as if Lucas Rijnveld's sticking to the guns for the new book, which is like the first one, set on a Dutch dairy farm, where it sounds as if all sorts of horrible things happen. Actually, it's the first book I've ever seen with a trigger warning on Amazon, actually, which is this novel is about an adult who's sexually attracted to a minor and contains sexual violence. Alex, did you read the first one?
I did, and it is I can't guess what the thing that was left out of the English translation was, but it certainly was a deeply unsettling book, even for someone like me who will always read a book about a dairy farm. So, I love books about farming because I live in the middle of lots of farms, but it was a very upsetting book, very striking, very individual. So yeah, interesting to see what they're going to do next.
Yeah, so we do have a few others, which really regrettably we don't have time to do a full summary of, but which I'm also really intrigued by. And we've got Chigozie Obiome's The Road to the Country, Helen Oyemi's Parasol Against the Axe, Rachel Kushner's Creation Lake, and Tim Parks's Mr. Geography.
It's also an interesting looking one, which is written by 14 writers, actually called 14 Days, a collaborative novel. Various characters in an apartment building in New York, with different famous writers doing each chapter, among them Margaret Atwood, Rachel Kushner again, and Emma Donoghue, who have all got Booker form.
I have absolutely no idea what Booker policy is on multi-authored books.
Yes, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Not a clue. I know there's been so many, you can't be dead, you can do, all this kind of thing. But can you, it's not, I put that more diplomatically, no posthumous publication. But multi-authored books, well, can you imagine what would happen to the prize money? Would there be, the speeches would go on for hours? Who can tell?
There are 14 writers going up on stage. They only get about $3,000 each, wouldn't they?
We should move away from boring on about Booker authors on a Booker podcast and look at some people who
that's our job, Joe.
just as worth reading, who do not, as James seems to keep saying, have Booker form.
Yeah, these people have just not got Booker form. I mean,
how dare they?
For what? How dare they? But then, and I must say, I focus slightly on these books because actually a book I've already read and one that I'm reading.
Hey.
Michael Cunningham's Day, which I've read 25 years after The Hours. This is not a sort of The Hours, but it does have a kind of similarity. It's called Day, and it has a similarity, structurally speaking, because it is set on a single day, 3 years apart, and it's kind of just as the pandemic is about to hit. The pandemic is never actually mentioned by name, in the midst of a lockdown, and then in a sort of coming out of lockdown, and I really enjoyed it. I thought
Do you think it's on par
good
with The Hours? I adore The Hours, and I think it's so formally inventive.
I think it's certainly, you can see so many of the themes that really interested him in the
Mhm.
way that people make these extremely difficult accommodations in families
Mm.
and deal, so much is unspoken in the dynamic between people that I would read it, because I think you may very well like it. And the other book I'm reading at the minute is Enlightenment by Sarah Perry.
Mm.
And all I really know about this, extra in an extra literary sense, is that she basically, I think, taught herself physics.
Oh,
That's what she's
God.
done for the last few years. She's been learning proper physics, and there's a lot of physics. I'm keeping up so far. I'm about 50 pages in, really enjoying it, and I'm just about managing to keep up with the astrophysics, and I have hopes that I may actually learn something. And I'm also just going to very quickly mention Joseph O'Neill's Godwin. That's out in June, I think, because it's partly about football. And as we know, Netherlands, he wrote about cricket. I mean, this is a way of exploring particularly things like global migration and the way that it is treated in different parts of the world. And this recurs in this book, Godwin, but it is about the pursuit of a footballer who, it says in the blurb, could be the next Messi. So I'm obviously going to read that.
Oh.
Blimey. And Sarah Perry, we should say, had that massive hit a few years ago with the Essex
Essex
Serpent.
Yes, and this book is indeed set in Essex.
Was that not literary enough for the book of the Essex Serpent, or was it tragically overlooked?
What do you mean too many people liked it? I loved it, I must say.
Yeah, sort of.
I didn't mean that. I love lots of books, and so do other people that have won the Booker Prize and have, as James says, Booker form. But I really did love the Essex Serpent. I found it so enjoyable.
You invite people on from another podcast, they're going to do that sort of thing to you. No. Elizabeth, absolutely lovely to have you, Alex. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
That was lovely, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
So, James, without choosing any of your own books that you presented to us, what sounds most exciting to you for the year ahead?
You'll be pleased to know, Joe, it's one of yours, actually, Percival Everett James.
Yes.
Huckleberry Finn from Jim's point of view. I think that sounds terrific. And I haven't read any of his books, but you made such a good case for him that I now need to read at least 3, including James.
So funny, but also so brutal. You're like shocked at yourself for laughing, kind of like with The Sellout, but kind of like, I love The Sellout, but I feel like Everett is on a different level. I'm going to be sacrilegious, and I'm going to choose one of the non-Booker books.
What?
And
You're not choosing Howard Jacobson then?
you know what? I somehow just can't find it in me. I'm going to choose Day by Michael Cunningham, that Alex said that she's finished now and absolutely loved, because I am genuinely such a massive fan of The Hours, which was kind of like a take on Mrs. Dalloway, which created sort of 3 intertwined narratives between Mrs. Dalloway herself as a character and Wolf, and then a modern day housewife, and kind of took them through a day much like Wolf's novel does.
And rather surprisingly became a hit movie.
Yes,
given that
with
summary.
Nicole Kidman and a prosthetic nose.
Oh, the famously Nicole Kidman's nose was the star of the film.
There's a really great essay by former Booker judge Hermione Lee on the subject of that prosthetic nose, which I do encourage people to find. Maybe we can put it in the show notes. But yeah, Day sounds like, I mean, it's his first novel in 10 years, and I'm just really excited because the form of his books are just like, they seem to be exquisite.
So, Joe, what about the books we just didn't have time for, and with apologies to all their authors?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because there are some really great authors on here. Chigozie Obioma has a book coming out called The Road to the Country. Andrew O'Hagan, Caledonian Road. Andrew O'Hagan seems to have like an incredible rate of production, I have to say. I'm always hearing that there's something, although maybe it's just, the mayflies kind of endlessly being appreciated and loved. Anyway, we've got Helen Oyemi with Parasol Against the Axe, Rachel Kushner with Creation Lake, and Tim Parks with Mr. Geography.
So plenty to look forward to in 2024, including, of course, lots of lovely Booker Prize podcasts. But that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be taking a look at the 1990 Booker Prize winner, Possession by A.S. Byatt, January's Booker Novel of the Month.
And our book group on Facebook is still going strong. You can join at any time. Just search for the Booker Prizes.
And, of course, as you probably know by now, you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Substack at the Booker Prizes.
Oh, so punchy, James.
Thank you.
Love that energy. Until next time, bye.
Bye. The Booker Prize podcast is hosted by Joe Hamya and me, James Walton. It's produced and edited by Kevin Miolo. And the executive producer is John Davenport. It's a Daddy Super Yacht production for the Booker Prizes.